chaos, frankly, a row about the party's policy on rail nationalisation, with various members of the shadow cabinet totally contradicting each other on what the party's policy is. Is that symbolic of a wider problem about a party that still doesn't know what it stands for? Well, on that, let's bring in Sienna Rodgers, senior writer for The House magazine, former editor of Labour List. Sienna, good evening to you. Just on that specifically, tell us what happened today about this dispute. Rachel Reeves had to clarify what she meant, and it all got a little bit messy.
It was a bit messy. It was very confusing. Basically, Rachel Reeves started the day telling the BBC that Labour would not go into the next election, promising to take private rail, energy and water companies back into public ownership. She said, it doesn't comply with my fiscal rules, that won't be happening. But people were then raising questions because the Shadow Transport Secretary had only said a couple of months ago that Labour definitely backs public ownership of rail, and she was not ambiguous about that at all. So then came the clarification to journalists saying, actually, Labour's position has not changed. The Shadow Chancellor had not heard the question properly. There is no change there. But then Keir Starmer, after delivering his speech on the economy in Liverpool, he was asked about this, and he said, well, basically he gave a very unclear answer, said, I want to be pragmatic, not ideological, and he wouldn't commit again to the public ownership of rail. So then the Shadow Transport Secretary took to Twitter to restate her view. Angela Rayner sort of joined in, the deputy leader, by retweeting that, and members of the Shadow Transport team. In the end, the kind of final settled position is that Starmer gave this interview to the Mirror this afternoon, and he said, so my priority is growth. I don't have an ideological attachment to public ownership, but rail is probably different from the others because so much of it is already in public ownership. So basically, Labour wouldn't reverse that, but probably wouldn't take the rest of it into public ownership. The whole thing was just very, very confusing. And I think it sort of stems from this main aim, which is to really send a message to people to say, I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. The problem is that spokespeople have that in mind when they're on the media, but then they sometimes forget what Labour's actual policy is that matters a lot of the time to their relationship with trade unions. I mean, this particular policy was crucial this year in persuading rail unions not to disaffiliate from the party. And this is something that Shadow Transport Secretary really worked on. So it kind of overshadowed his speech on the economy as well.
Is this a sign, Sienna? You said it's confusing. I'd say it's pretty shambolic. Is this a sign of a party at this point in time that doesn't really know what it should stand for or does stand for?
I think Keir Starmer would say he knows what it should stand for. I'm not Jeremy Corbyn, although I think people have probably got the message on that already. And also persuading voters that Labour can be trusted on the economy. That's really what he wanted to do today. He wants to say, I'm not unrealistic as Corbyn's Labour was. I'm also not unrealistic as the two Tory leadership candidates are, Rishi Sunak and his kind of fiscal conservatism, and then Liz Truss and her unfunded tax cuts. That's the argument that he would make. But when there are clearly divides in the shadow cabinet between the leader and the deputy leader, between various shadow cabinet members in different briefs, that's just being overshadowed, and it comes across as a bit chaotic to people.
Is that part of the problem here? Is the party still too divided? It's more divided, more united than I'd say it was a few years ago. But is that part of the issue, do you think, Sienna?
It's definitely more united. There is less kind of toxic factionalism, I think. But part of that is that people have left to the party. A lot of the people who supported Corbyn, I mean, including the fact that he himself has been excluded from the parliamentary party. So the party is more united, but it seems as if message discipline is just still a little bit of a problem. And I think that may be because the message a lot of the time is just so nuanced. I mean, today, his main policy offer was establishing an industrial strategy council, which would hold
radical and innovative that is, isn't it?
Well, it's just not going to stick in people's minds. I mean, including shadow cabinet members, I think, front benchers still say, no, I'm not quite sure what Keir Starmer's actual politics are himself, and I'm not sure what sort of direction we're going in. So I think there's still a lot of clarity missing.
Sienna, thank you. Sienna Rodgers there, senior writer for The House, former editor of Labour List. Great to speak to you.